Hi, my name is Angela Eastlund. I'm a current master's candidate at Illinois State University with the Stevenson Center. I'm pursuing a degree in cultural anthropology and applied community and economic development. I earned my undergraduate degree at Creighton University in medical anthropology, and I grew up in Buffalo, Minnesota. I'm now in my second and final year of the ACED master's program and about halfway through my professional practice fellowship. My fellowship placement is with the Chicago Jobs Council, a nonprofit organization located in downtown Chicago that views employment as a pathway out of poverty. In the workforce development field, the Jobs Council has two main areas of expertise: to be a capacity-building organization for frontline workforce development staff that serve job seekers, and a policy advocacy organization that advocates to remove structural barriers to employment on behalf of frontline workforce development organizations and job seekers. My title at the Jobs Council is the Policy Fellow, which means that my role is mainly to support the policy team, and I also do a lot of communications work as well on behalf of the whole organization. The Jobs Council is a small but mighty team of about 15 people, and we've got a lot happening this year. So, one of the major policy issues that I've been working on with the policy team is advocacy around the SNAP Employment and Training Program. For those of you unfamiliar with SNAP, it is an acronym for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, formerly known as food stamps. This federal program is largely touted as the most effective national anti-hunger strategy. As a leader in the workforce development field, where inaccessibility to food is often a barrier to health and sustaining quality employment, the Jobs Council is particularly well poised to understand and advocate around the SNAP Employment and Training faction of SNAP. So, to explain a little bit more about SNAP Employment and Training and why it is relevant now here in Illinois and Chicago, and what we can do to improve the program's effectiveness, is our Director of Policy here at the Jobs Council, Castaldi.
Hey.
All right. So, what is SNAP and what is SNAP ENT?
So SNAP is a very long-standing program in this country, and essentially what it is our nation's most effective anti-hunger program. So functionally, someone who's very low income or families that are very low income receive monthly benefits. Nowadays, they're put on to basically a little debit card or credit card that can only be used in certain places to buy groceries. That helps families who are very low income afford food. And it's sort of wrapped into actually our country's agricultural policy, because it also functionally serves as a subsidy to agriculture in our country by helping people to afford fresh and healthy food.
Okay, so tell me a little bit more about SNAP ENT.
Sure. So SNAP ENT, that stands for SNAP Employment and Training. And SNAP Employment and Training is a newer aspect of the SNAP program. And it really sort of came into full swing around the time, or started having big impacts at the time of welfare reform in the mid-1990s. Although I think the employment and training component of SNAP has been around since the 70s or 80s. I can't quite remember. But SNAP Employment and Training, the idea behind it is that preferably families would make enough money, individuals would make enough money so that they could afford food on their own. And they need good jobs to be able to do that. And for folks who are on SNAP, not always, but sometimes they may not have had a lot of previous employment experience, or they may not have had sort of great educational opportunities, and may require some additional training and support in order to find family-sustaining employment. So the program aims to do that. It provides some money from the federal government to the states to put together job training and employment programming specifically for recipients of SNAP.
Okay, and how does SNAP Employment and Training function in Illinois, in Chicago?
Right. So SNAP is not the only game in town when it comes to workforce development. We have a whole workforce development system, most of which is funded through a different federal program called the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, or WIOA. So that's a whole big chunk of money that similarly is given from the federal government to states and localities to provide workforce development funding. And that system in Illinois is much bigger than the SNAP Employment and Training Program. So probably, by our estimates, around 15,000 people take place in WIOA-funded workforce activities, whereas SNAP Employment and Training is a really small number, around, by our best guess, like 2,000 people in any given month are in the SNAP ENT program. But the programs are supposed to be pretty similar in essence. The idea is to provide job seekers with resources, support, training, that will help them get into a career pathway. So not just any old crappy retail job or service industry job where the wages are so low that the person might still qualify for SNAP anyway, but rather to get folks on a path that has opportunities for advancement in an industry where there's sort of job growth potential and professional development potential. That's sort of the underlying purpose of these systems. But functionally, what we know about SNAP ENT in Illinois specifically is that it's really siloed from the rest of the workforce development system, A. So it operates sort of totally separately. B, like I said, it serves a really small fraction of people. So there are about 1.75 million people in the state of Illinois who receive SNAP. Of those people, around 350 or so thousand are people who are sort of able-bodied adults without dependents. That's a term that comes up a lot in SNAP, ABODs. Those are the people who, are between 18 and 59. They have no dependents, either kids or other family members, and they're seen as able-bodied and able to work. So those are people that are subject to work requirements under SNAP federally, and employment and training services are meant to be geared towards them. What we also know is that some of those folks are the most disconnected from the labor force. So those people often face multiple barriers to employment. That can be sort of low educational attainment, a criminal conviction, maybe limited English proficiency, or just not a strong employment background, and or undiagnosed disabilities and mental illnesses. That's probably the biggest thing in there. And so these are folks that are going to potentially need a bit more support to get to work. And our workforce development system has traditionally not succeeded in helping people really well who face multiple barriers to work. And the same could be said for SNAP ENT. What SNAP ENT does do, it provides services to very few, but it requires services of very many. So even though the program itself is only big enough to serve a small fraction, those who are sort of subject to the requirements to participate because of the laws of SNAP, but don't participate, can actually be sanctioned and kick off SNAP. So this is sort of a long, rambling way to get to the point that what SNAP ENT does in Illinois right now, more of what it does is just subject people to sort of administrative monitoring and compliance, and it does less of what it's intended to do, which is to move people out of poverty through employment.
Okay, so that makes sense. And we did a lot of advocacy last fall around the ABOD waiver, asking then Governor Rauner's administration to submit the ABOD waiver. What is the ABOD waiver and how does it help Illinois, and why were we for the waiver?
Right. So these able-bodied adults without dependents, ABODs, federal law says they are required to work 20 hours a week or participate in employment services for 20 hours a week, or else they are only allowed to get benefits for 3 out of every 36 months. It's kind of a mouthful. Functionally, if you're not working or trying to work and you don't prove it, you can't get SNAP on an ongoing basis. But states that have higher than average unemployment rates or just sort of poor economic factors have been traditionally eligible for a waiver of this work requirement for their ABOD population. Illinois is a state that, because of its higher than average unemployment rates, has qualified for every county except for one for the past 20 years. So the only county in Illinois, there's 102 counties in Illinois, and 101 of them are exempted from work requirements. So this has been a big push. The state has to apply for it every single year, and it's actually required a ton of advocacy to get the state to request the waiver. And the waiver is really important because all the issues that I just mentioned, the fact that the program is really small, that we don't have the infrastructure, all of those things means that if all of a sudden we have to have work requirements and all of these ABODs are required to work or get services, we know there's not enough services. We know they face a lot of barriers to employment, and there aren't just like an abundance of jobs that they could just get at the drop of a hat. So what it means is people would lose food assistance and be hungry. And so that's why we've been really involved in the ABOD waiver. But one really scary thing that's on the horizon that we have our eyes on is the Trump administration has suggested that it's going to propose an administrative rule change, so changing federal regulations that would all but eliminate the ABOD waiver for states like Illinois. And that could happen as soon as October of this year, 2019. So we're sort of freaking out because this waiver that we fought so hard for, and really like without this waiver, we would have already been in a crisis even worse than we are now. It could soon go away, and that could mean hundreds of thousands of people in the state and frankly millions of people across the country losing food benefits.
So there's been you've touched on a lot of points about why stricter work requirements for SNAP participants would be a bad thing. They face a lot of barriers, they could lose their benefits, there's a lot of administrative costs. Why do you think work requirements are so attached to public benefits, especially for the ABOD population?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think it has to do broadly with this question and this public debate about the role of government, and also about sort of the deserving versus the undeserving poor. So we don't typically see, a single person without kids who is not severely disabled. We don't sympathize with the fact that they could be living in poverty for any number of other reasons. Mm-hmm. And so we blame them for being in poverty, and we don't want them to receive benefits. And I say the royal we. Obviously, this is not us in this room, but that's how the direction our public policy is moved towards, where if we are going to get benefits from the government, you got to earn them, and you got to be on your way to pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. And it's kind of funny because it's such a trope, but it really is that I think is a huge part of what's driving this policy, is this idea that people don't need a handout, they need to be self-sufficient, and the role of government is not to sort of bankroll people. But I think that the reason that work requirements are bad is because they don't actually help people get to work. What we should be looking at is the fact that job quality at the low end of the labor market has gotten so poor that you can be working full-time at minimum wage and still qualify for food stamps, which means by definition, working full-time at minimum wage, you cannot afford food. And so I think we often turn to the individual who is in need and try to place the blame on them. And what we could be doing is actually turning our glance upward to companies and places that are employing people and driving down the quality of employment and the benefits and wages that are available to low-wage workers in a way that puts them in a position where they need help affording food. So we know that SNAP is used by low-income workers as a way to hedge against unpredictable schedules, seasonal employment, really low wages. This is just something that's necessary to protect low-income workers and job seekers. And we also know that sort of the unemployment rate right now, the resurgence and talk about work requirements has to do with the fact that we have a quote-unquote low unemployment rate. What we also know is that's like unemployment statistics really mask a lot of different dynamics. So for example, in Chicago, the overall unemployment rate might be 4%, but in low-income Black neighborhoods, unemployment is more like 10% or higher. And that's not because of the people in that neighborhood. That's because publicly and privately, those neighborhoods have seen persistent disinvestment. There are people there aren't jobs created in their neighborhoods. There's not good transportation to get people to where they need to go. And there's like rampant sort of discrimination that folks face when they try to get into the workplace. So it's just one of those really frustrating things, because I think there's a misperception, about SNAP benefits themselves. Like, people don't just not get ahead to collect that sweet $120 a month that they get from SNAP. Like, people need more than that to survive. It's not like they can survive just off of SNAP in the first place. And the fact is, it's like job quality is so poor that even if everyone was working in sort of crappy jobs, they would still need SNAP. So it's just sort of a frustrating time, because the conversation doesn't seem focused where it should be, which is how to actually move people towards self-sufficiency instead of sort of punishing them for broader dynamics that they're just sort of caught up in.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you for diving into those definitions. They can be super complicated and confusing, even for us sometimes when we work on these every day.
Totally.
It can get a little frustrating and confusing. So it looks like we have a lot of work to do this spring.
That's for sure. And we're glad to have you here to help us with it.
Thanks. All right. So to explain a little bit more about SNAP employment and training's history, why it's relevant now here in Illinois and Chicago, and what we can do to improve the program's effectiveness, is our executive director here at the Jobs Council, Carrie Thomas. So Carrie, based on your experience with SNAP employment and training, how have you seen SNAP E&T evolve over time since welfare reform in the late 90s, especially regarding work requirements?
Well, SNAP employment and training doesn't get a huge amount of attention in the policy discussions on an ongoing basis. But every once in a while, when there's a desire to look like politicians are being tough on people who are receiving public benefits, SNAP E&T will get renewed attention. And so there have been, prior to the moment we're in right now, there have been attempts to make the work requirements even stronger, but those have been fought back. So we haven't had that much legislative change to SNAP E&T, although there have been attempts to make the work requirements even stricter than they are now, or limit SNAP benefits in other ways. Then during the Obama administration, a couple of things happened. One, advocates really brought to the attention of the administration that we weren't really using SNAP E&T as part of our national sort of workforce strategy, and that was really what it was intended to be, as an on-ramp to additional workforce services or employment for people who are really desperately poor. So trying to shift the thinking from requiring people to work as an opportunity to be a gateway to good work and training for better jobs for the people that could work for. So what happened was the administration looked at their resources and also some best practices from around the country about how some states were actually using their SNAP E&T program as part of their whole workforce strategy. And so two things happened. One, the administration really beefed up their own staff at the Food and Nutrition Service in SNAP E&T. And so that meant more staff in DC, that meant more staff to support states, and then did a series of learning academies and technical assistance strategies that are still ongoing with states to really help states understand how to have stronger skills-based workforce programs, and to help them align their SNAP E&T program with the rest of their workforce system. And that included specifically, trying to help states leverage that 50% match, that 50-50 programming, that untapped federal resource that nobody's using. So that's been ongoing for a few years now. The other thing that happened was when the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act passed, or when it was being debated, advocates brought that fact that SNAP E&T should be part of the mix to that conversation. So now in the WIOA law, there is a lot of encouragement for states to think about their planning documents for the different employment programs together with WIOA. So that was another policy change. It's not a requirement, it's not a mandate, but it's really encouragement for states to really think about SNAP E&T and also their TANF employment and training programs as part of all of their workforce planning and strategy development. So those, I think, are the biggest changes.
Okay. And why is SNAP employment and training policy advocacy relevant to the current workforce development system here and now in Chicago and broader Illinois?
So again, I think there's two main reasons, like at this moment, where it's really important. So one is what's happened to WIOA and the WIOA system over time. So it's much smaller. So the funding of the WIOA system is 40% less than it was a dozen years ago or so. So it has fewer resources, which means that it can't serve as many people. And it is still structured to serve the unemployed people that need its services that are most likely to get employed relatively quickly. And so it's not really set up to serve the population of job seekers that might be coming through SNAP E&T and might need longer period of time to get services or need more ongoing support while they're getting training services. So that means that the SNAP E&T program itself needs to be stronger and it needs to be bigger. And because the federal money is being left on the table, it's really an opportunity to leverage some new resources that WIOA has lost over time, and that our state in its current state is not, the state of our finances is not going to be able to, bring new resources to the table. So I think the fact that WIOA doesn't really serve this population well, it's not really structured to serve this population well, and because there's untapped resources for SNAP E&T, I think that's why it's getting a lot of attention right now, and why we're giving it a lot of attention right now. It's really the opportunity to bring people who are kind of not just not served well, but kind of invisible to the traditional workforce system into the traditional workforce system. It's going to require kind of a heavy lift to really get our SNAP E&T program kind of aligned with the sort of the best practices in workforce development, but it's completely worth it, as we've seen in other states.
Thanks, Carrie, for sharing those insights and explaining a little more of the historical context of SNAP E&T. So prior to my fellowship here at the Jobs Council, my qualitative research background focused on many of the social determinants of health and well-being. So this policy focused on an anti-hunger program that also engages with workforce development and the labor market has broadened my understanding of the larger systems that move people in and out of the economy and keep populations in cycles of poverty. It's also exposed more of the harmful effects of wealth inequality for me. Until I had these direct hands-on experiences with policy advocacy strategies, tools, and resources here at the Jobs Council, I often found myself frustrated, wondering how I would be able to even make a small difference in these institutionalized barriers that I had learned about in the classroom and observed in my day-to-day life. Having exposure to the broad spectrum of policy advocacy activities and breaking down the ideas that I had, thinking that it was out of my capacity, not in my skill set, kind of intimidating, really flipped those 180 and gave me a desire to keep building these skills and having policy advocacy as a component of my future careers. So as I near the end of my fellowship in the ACED program, I'll be working on a capstone project that will be an annotated advocacy toolkit focused on SNAP employment and training policy advocacy strategies that I've supported during my time here at the Jobs Council. And the goal for the toolkit will be to give context to the policy advocacy strategies that we've been working on. It'll lay out a short literature review on the history of welfare reform through an anthropological lens, and describe and explain our strategies on word choice and messaging. The toolkit will ultimately serve as a record of our policy advocacy and as an example for future policy newbies like me to learn from as they join the team here. I'm really looking forward to presenting my capstone to the Illinois State academic community, as well as having the opportunity to use this toolkit as evidence to my capacity building for an organization as I apply for jobs in the future. Thanks for listening.